Welcome to ABC Real Time Talk Show. And today we'll focus mainly on the Middle East, Hamas and Israel war, and the issues taking place in Bangladesh. Well, we have two guests, one from America, another from Bangladesh. And from America, Professor Dr. Ali Riaz, Distinguished Professor of Political Science, Illinois State University. He is also non-resident Senior Fellow, Atlantic Council. At the same time, President, Bangladesh Institute, American Institute of Bangladesh Studies. How are you, Mr. Ali Riaz?
Thank you. Sinha, it's good to be with you.
Another being Mr. Humayun Kabir, former ambassador to United States of America. He was ambassador to many countries, and mainly America is important for our discussions here. And he is one of the leading diplomatic analysts at this very moment. Well,
Thank
how are
you.
you, Mr. Humayun Kabir?
Fine, thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to your show.
Well, Mr. Ali Riaz, our main question is UN Secretary General Mr. Antonio Guterres recently said that the very beginning of the Israel problem issue is not new. It has not started from the zero. Now, why he is commented such a way? Because he is under serious criticism from the Israel and many countries already made a message he should resign. Why all this taking place regarding Gaza issue? Mr. Ali Riaz.
Dr. Sinha, let me put it this way. I tend to agree with the Secretary General's comment that we need to put the Palestinian issue, particularly what is happening in Gaza at this moment, into the context. Because without the history and the context, we would not be able to understand what is going on. It is not by no way condoning a violence that has been perpetrated by Hamas when it launched an attack on Israel. But at the same time, there should be a very clear understanding as to what prompted this kind of situation, if not particularly this specific event. Because what we have seen, the Palestinian issue often tend to be considered with one incident and then we forget about it. And then there is another incident, whether it is, Israeli bombardment of Gaza or Hamas, launching an attack on Israel. All these things tend to be news cycle. We just look at that event and try to put it as if who started it, who didn't start it, who is a perpetrator, who is the victim, kind of thing. That puts the whole thing in the back burner is the history and the context of it. First of all, what happened on 7th is not exactly something that started on 7th. There's a long history to it, and we cannot simply ignore the history. For example, what has been happening since 1948, or for that matter, 1967, that has happened. But most importantly to me, in order to understand the Gaza situation, we need to look at what happened since 2007. Gaza has been under blockade for almost 16, 17 years. And this is unbearable for the people in Gaza. Hamas is in power. Does not necessarily mean that Gaza has to be penalized or punished, because the people who are living in Gaza does not need to be put in this kind of situation. As I said, what has happened in case of 7th October, the attack is by no means I'm going to support or condone that one. But that does not justify the relentless attack that has been followed up by Israel. So when Antonio Guterres has brought this issue to the fore, reminding us of the history, we need to actually take it very seriously. He has been criticized by Israel for understandable reason. Similarly, perhaps the U.S. administration or at least the U.S. representative might criticize him. There could be other countries. But the point is, the essential thing that we need to understand that the Palestinian issue cannot be simply understood from one incident or one day or one, a series of incidents. We have seen this kind of situation previously that doesn't lead into a solution. And without having a long term solution, particularly what is happening, particularly with respect to Gaza, I would say, that the blockade has crippled the whole economy. It has created humanitarian situation even before what we have witnessed. More than 4,000 people have been killed. Most of them, if not most, a significant number of them are definitely children. Gaza's people in Gaza doesn't have the access to water. The hospitals have been bombed, and all these things. So yes, despite the criticism, it brings us back to the central point that it needs to be put in his historical context. It needs to be understood that there should be a long-term solution to the Palestinian question. And to me, the long-term solution is one and only one. That is to have two-state solution. Both countries, Israel and the Palestinians, have to acknowledge and admit, which those who are in the Palestinian Authority, they have accepted the existence and the right of Israel to exist. Similarly, it is necessary to underscore that the Palestinians need to have their own independent state, which is viable, which actually provides a solution to it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ali Riaz. Mr. Humayun Kabir, everybody knows that you are a very, very penetrative diplomat. It means you have a penetrative infiltration with everything. And what is your understanding about the scenario just taking place in the Middle East?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I think Professor Ali Riaz has laid out the landscape. And let me add a few words and then I will come to your question. The Palestinian issue is a century plus old issue. It started with the Balfour Declaration in 1917, then 48 with the establishment of Israel, and at that time, indeed, there were a UN resolution to set up two states. But that didn't work. Israel was set up. And then a refugee crisis erupted, and that led almost 750,000 people, or Palestinians, being removed from their land. So then it started, and now you can see the same scenario is playing out again in Gaza. Yesterday or today I saw 1.4 million Gazans have been now uprooted or dislocated. So, the Palestinians remember that 1948 refugee crisis or expulsion from their land or from their houses as Nakba. And some people are saying that this is another version of Nakba, possibly. So what is happening is a humanitarian crisis. And the same logic on which the state of Israel was established, that the Jews have suffered from historic injustices and justice should be made to them. They should be given the right to live in their own homeland and so on and so forth. As Professor Ali Riaz has mentioned, the Palestinians have the same right. And I mean, if you look at it from a very generous point of view, both of these people lived in their same land. So the two-state solution, which was agreed in Oslo in 1993, that remains as a basis. And people are talking about that. So why it is? Because if two states, I would say, comes into reality, then it will address possibly, I mean, that's what we can assume, that the Palestinians would be relieved of the injustice under which they are suffering for the last, say, 7+ decades. They can have their rights to choose their future. They can have a land to develop their, their identity. So now the basis on which the state of Israel was set up, the same logic applies to Palestinians. Because now for 7 decades plus, Palestinians have been the victim of injustice, loss of rights, being uprooted from their land, and so on and so forth. So now people are talking about double kind of standard or something like that. When we are talking about Ukraine as a moral issue, that any aggression should be responded to, the same moral principle also applies to the Palestinians as well. So I agree with Professor Ali Riaz that nobody is condoning what happened in Israel on 7th of October. But that has to be contextualized. If we don't if we isolate one incident and then go and give collective punishment to a population, then it's unfair. That's unjust. So we have to be just to both sides. It has to. We should have a one moral principle. Then we can apply to both sides. So today, when we are seeing the devastation, deaths taking place, and merciless bombing of Gaza, for example, and these are all civilians. Those who are today, I saw the report that 7,000 plus people have already died, and 20 to 25% of them are children, women. So I think the humanity has a responsibility to that, to the Palestinian people, as much as it has to any injustice having been caused to Israel, for example, in terms of civilian loss, the loss of civilian lives, and so on and so forth. Now, coming to the issue, I mean, this has, I would say, this has shattered the kind of peace that that was trying to be built up during the last few years. We have seen during the last few years that Palestine issue was consigned into oblivion, and there was an effort to build up a new structure, just ignoring the Palestinian people, and that created a sense of desperation. And that desperation, I think, UN Secretary General has mentioned about that it doesn't happen or it didn't happen in a vacuum. So we have to understand when people get desperate, they can do desperate things. So if unless we address this issue, so that desperation will continue. And now what is happening, the additional element that you have mentioned, Dr. Saeed, that now this, unless we address this issue, if the humanitarian crisis worsens further, then it could create new problems. For example, already we are seeing that many Arab countries, the Arab states are now agitated, creating pressure on the governments in Jordan, in Egypt, in Middle East and other countries. And most of these countries are friends of the West. So they are now also feeling that if the Gaza issue or some kind of ceasefire to facilitate the movement of humanitarian support is not allowed, in that case, the region could become more volatile. And we know that the Americans have moved their flotilla to their two, I would say, aircraft carrier groups. They are supplying Israel with ammunition and other material. But on the other hand, we are seeing that Iran is warning. Iran is saying that it could ignite further larger war. And also on the other side, we are seeing that Jordan and Egypt has said no more refugees. We have enough of that. It means that they are giving a clear signal that any move to remove these Palestinian people from Gaza is not acceptable. So we are seeing that the whole region is now seething. Whole region is now in a kind of vortex. Things are heating up. And on the other side, if we go a little distant, we can see China is talking about somehow resolving or addressing the Palestinian issue. Russians are talking about that. And South, the global South, as we call them. I mean, most of the developing countries are trying to have a ceasefire. Brazil moved a ceasefire proposal at the UN Security Council, which was vetoed by the United States. Russia moved something that was also vetoed. So UN Security Council during the last few days tried several proposals. None could get the consensus. But I think it's extremely important for the UN Security Council to come to an agreement to address some of these issues, such as the humanitarian crisis, the killing of civilians, supply of relief material inside Gaza, and possibly looking at a larger picture and try to find out, because dousing a fire doesn't solve the problem. I mean, even if we address the humanitarian crisis in Gaza at this time, this problem, as Professor Riaz has said, I concur with him fully, that if the seed of the aspirations of the people are not met, one generation will go, the next generation will come. I remember when I think Palestinians were, our PLO was removed from Beirut, Lebanon, in 1982. Israel thought that we have resolved the PLO issue or Palestinian issue, but that didn't. Now Palestinian issue has come back, and after 10 years, they had to sign Oslo Accord with the same PLO. So my personal view is that this is a time, it's a shock for everybody. It's a shock. It has been a shock for the Israelis. It is now a shock or ongoing shock for the Palestinians in Gaza. And also in West Bank, we are seeing that Palestinians are now in anger. Israelis are equally in anger. But now the question is, anger doesn't give solution. We have to think with a cool head. And I think President Biden has somehow indicated that Israel shouldn't take action in rage. I think that's a good counsel, and everybody should think about that. And the friends, I mean, the humanity, I would say, the international community, should now come together to really address the immediate challenges, saving lives, and also giving some kind of satisfaction, and if possible, delay or stop the ground incursion, Israeli ground incursion. So that would be a further disaster, and we don't know what will happen, because we have seen that in Iraq or Afghanistan in earlier phases. So Gaza could be another situation like that, and I don't believe that anybody wants to have that. So in light of this, all these things, I think it would be perhaps a judicious move to look at this issue from a longer perspective and go back to what we have agreed, a two-state solution, living side by side in peace with each other. We have to understand that, because without peace, if there is no peace for the Palestinians, unfortunately, there would be no peace for Israelis as well, and we have seen that.
Well, Mr. Humayun Kabir, thank you very much for your explanation and analysis.
Dr. Sinha
Dr.
Sayeed,
Ali Riaz.
let me
Dr. Ali Riaz,
just
simple question to you is that Israel by this time made Jerusalem the capital city. With Jerusalem as capital city, do you think there may be any possibility of two-state philosophy at this very moment, because it is staging comeback again?
see, Dr. Said, let me add to what Ambassador Humayun Kabir has already noted. One of the major issues that we are witnessing currently, when Israel started its military operation, one of the things that they have said, they are going to simply decimate the Hamas leadership. Okay, I understand. I get it. I get their point, what they are trying to mean. But decimating Hamas leadership means what? Who is going to replace them? There's no alternative at this point, unfortunately. And this is because of the blockade of the last, since 2007, since the election. Hamas was elected, and did I like it that Hamas was elected personally? No, I didn't. That does not mean that you should have stopped that and have this kind of situation. By trying to isolate Hamas over the years, that has created this problem of lack of any representation of people in Gaza. Hamas is an authoritarian in the sense that they have complete control over Gaza, but that does not mean that people shouldn't have the opportunity. Same thing. I'm not very much, fond of the Mahmoud Abbas leadership in West Bank, because they have become authoritarian in the recent days and pretty much marginalized opposition. The point here is, when they're talking about decimation, they're actually inviting a situation that might not exactly be good for Israel's own security, because the replacement would be Islamic Jihad. Does Israel want it? Islamic Jihad that we see is far more lethal then absolutely, in my judgment, is unacceptable at this point. The Gaza land incursion that they have talked about initially, and thanks to President Biden in this respect, that he immediately went in and in some ways tried to reason with the Israelis that would be a disaster, as Ambassador Kabir has rightly pointed out, that this would be a disaster because if they do invade, two problems are there. Number one is that since there won't be a replacement, that would be practically Israeli invasion would have to continue for a long time. Annexation is one thing, but at least they will have to be there for a long time. Does Israel want that? They had withdrawn from West Bank. They have withdrawn under the Oslo, treaty. Having that kind of situation is not good for Israel's security. The second thing is that if they invade, that would be a continued armed insurgency within Gaza, because Gaza is a very small place. Nobody can go anywhere. They have to either. There are two options: fight or flight, and in most cases, it would end up with fight, which is undesirable. So these are the situations that we are witnessing at this point. That needs to. And please remind me the question that you brought. Sorry for missing that question that you brought. Say. What was the question that you asked me? Please remind me.
With Jerusalem.
The Jerusalem question. Thank you for reminding me.
Capital city of Israel.
No,
Do you think any possibility?
No, I mean this is. I don't think that Jerusalem should be a city that. As a matter of fact, one solution could be the Vatican solution with respect to Jerusalem. That they should be, but the Oslo agreement said that this should be decided later. Right? So any violation of the Oslo Agreement is practically, I would say, detrimental to Israel's interest as well. Not to mention the Palestinians' rights, not even privileges we are talking about. So your question with respect to Jerusalem, and we know that when even in case of the United States, what happened in the previous administration, and Mr. Trump has recognized the Jerusalem, and they moved the U.S. embassy at one point, which was absolutely a wrong decision from the U.S. administration. At this point, the primary focus should be, as Ambassador Kabir has pointed out, is that humanitarian efforts should be launched as soon as practically possible. 16 trucks every day with water is not sufficient for those people who are living under continuous bombardment. That needs to be stopped. If Israel wants to continue any kind of security operation, it has to be proportionate. It has right to exist does not necessarily mean that it has a right to cross the limit of it. And acting on rage, as former President Barack Obama has mentioned, President Biden has mentioned, acting on rage by the United States itself after 9/11 was wrong, created a lot of problems. So-called war on terror has brought, pretty much disaster to this entire system. So going back, the Jerusalem question should not be separated from this conversation as to what is the solution we're looking for to. The solution is definitely within the Oslo Agreement. It is there. It is acceptable to both parties, not necessarily satisfactory to both parties. Because had it been satisfactory to both parties, it would have been good. But was it acceptable? It is acceptable. Hamas, in this respect, doesn't, concur with or respect the Oslo Agreement. Hamas as an organization does not mean that for their act, all these people, innocent people in Gaza, need to be punished. Punitive measures and indiscriminate punitive measures should not be the reaction to what Hamas has done. Repeatedly, I say that Hamas's actions are nothing that we cannot condone what Hamas has done, because killing civilians, whether within Israel or in Gaza, should be equally treated and equally condemnable. So, two-state solution based on Oslo, which has left Jerusalem question out, should be left there until and unless these two parties can come to a conclusion, some kind of an arrangement.
Well, Ambassador Humayun Kabir, do you think that America should play more positive role here? Because America by this time is stood like a Himalaya beside Israel, negating the very pulse aspiration of the people of Gaza or say the Palestinian people. And do you think America in course of time will feel that there should be a very sustainable solution in the Middle East? Mr. Humayun Kabir.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I should say that we all know that Americans are the strongest backer of Israel, and we are seeing during the last 2 weeks uh, unqualified support they have extended to Israel. Now, we also must admit the fact or accept the fact that the Americans had been trying for the last, I would say, a decade or so to stay away from the Middle Eastern politics, particularly after their Iraqi experience and so on and so forth. But now this incident on 7th, the Hamas attack on 7th, has drawn America or United States back into that. And if you look at now how the Americans are getting involved with Israel, President Biden visited within a week's time, and that was followed up by more visits from European leaders as well. So here we can see that Americans are in the lead, and as Professor Riaz has mentioned, and the global media also carried that information. President Biden not only went to express his solidarity, there are discussions that he went to prevail on the Israeli decision makers that don't go into a rash decision and go to invade Gaza, because that would have been disastrous. And now that the Americans provide Israel with almost $3 billion of aid every year, they know that if there is a problem, then Americans will have to bear the brunt. So I think good sense prevailed. On the one hand, they wanted to publicly show the solidarity with the Israelis, which has again a domestic kind of compulsion for President Biden. And at the same time, privately, I think President Biden counseled the Israeli leaders to think twice and perhaps share their, the American experience in Iraq and Afghanistan. And yesterday I saw another information which is interesting. Now one American general is embedded in the Israeli military headquarters. And he's an expert on Fallujah, how the Americans fought the urban warfare in Iraq. So he's an expert on that. He's a general sitting there. So it means that the Americans, although they wanted to get out of the Middle Eastern, I should say, quagmire, but now they have come back. And my sense is that if there has to be a solution, the American involvement is a mandatory thing. Without American leadership, I don't believe that there is any other country around or in the world which can bring this party together at this time. And we go back to, we have been talking about Oslo. It was President Clinton who took, and the Oslo Accord was signed in Washington at that time. I remember in September 1993. So under the leadership of President Clinton at that time. So I know that President Biden must be consumed by other issues at this time, Ukraine being one. But the recent developments in the Middle East has also become a kind of challenge for him to address. So I think now what the Biden administration will do, we don't know. But there is a growing, I'm reading in the newspaper that there's a growing debate in the United States that should we give Israel a blank check or we should put some conditions. What are the conditions? my sense is the conditions could be you go for a solution, go for a sustainable a kind of arrangement so that this issue doesn't come back again and again. So this
See,
is what I think. So my sense is that apparently it doesn't look that Americans are interested or they can take the leadership because it's too clumsy an issue. But the situation has become such that I mean, although the Americans may not feel comfortable, they have been drawn into that and they have to, if they want to get out of it, perhaps they will have to give some leadership so that a sustainable solution can be found to address this issue. Otherwise, this issue will continue to fester. Today, they will destroy Hamas, but new Hamas will come in. And that we have seen. The Americans have tried 20 years to destroy Taliban. And unfortunately, they had to negotiate with Taliban for their own exit. That should be a lesson for everybody to understand. It's very difficult. When a population remains motivated and they have suffered for that motivation, for that aspiration, it's very difficult to remove that. And Palestinians, they have historic grievances. Their land was taken, their rights were taken, the injustice meted out to them for decades. So for Palestinians, this is a fight that perhaps they will continue for generations if required. So I think it is time that now that this time at least Hamas has proven or challenged the invincibility of Israel. Now I think good sense should prevail in Israel even to look at different options. And obviously the different option, nothing could be better than living in peace side by side and avoid conflict.
see, both Russia and China seems to be, their reaction is very interesting to me. They don't actually want to have a prolonged crisis situation there. You know why? Because over the years, what we saw over the last decade or so, United States practically stepped out of Middle East, rightly or wrongly. Some people would say they did the good thing because they were the problem. Some would say, see, it is the giving away the leadership. In any case, the United States seems to have found a different way, or at least pursued a different way of solving it by having relationship between Israel and all the Muslim majority countries in the Middle East, say even with the Saudis that we have seen. But there is a contestation here of the leadership, regional leadership. Iran would not like to see that Israel is having a better relationship with the Saudis, which would actually put them in a very difficult spot. So they have their own interest to these, somewhat frustrate that effort. The United States for decades tried a different way. By being there, physically being present there, having pursued this policy that they are completely engaged in the Middle East. That didn't work. We know why that didn't work, because there has been some duplicitous, effort. That didn't work. So they said, okay, we're getting out of it. Let's try a different way. Let's encourage Israel and Saudis, our friends, so within quotation, to come in agreement. We will step out, and United States did step out. That has actually created opportunities for Russia and China, and they loved it that the United States is out of the Middle East. And we have seen how China actually tried to have peace between various factions and all sorts of things, various countries. So now, by having this situation, and if it turns out to be a prolonged engagement of Israelis in Gaza, that has already brought United States back, as Ambassador Kabir has mentioned, that it has brought back the United States, which is not actually something Russia and China would love to see. Now, how the solution can be, you mentioned about whether U.S. can do it. Can U.S. an honest broker? My answer is yes and no. No, in the sense that U.S. actually has sided with Israelis in such a way and in such a manner, in such an unequivocal and unqualified manner. But the things are changing within the United States. Most of the people, if you look at the recent polls, the younger population seems to be questioning the U.S. policy towards Israel. I mean, they are the ones coming. we have seen some kind of rumble within the State Department. Some people resigned. So there are other issues that are coming up. So in that sense, you can say, okay, can they be the honest broker? No, they cannot be honest broker. They have sided. But on the other hand, that can you actually ignore? There are two things that you cannot ignore in case of the Middle East. Number one is Palestinian issue. You simply cannot ignore that one. Any effort to ignore that one is going to have a deleterious effect, and that's what we are witnessing. Because continuation of this problem or the rightful solution of the Palestinian things cannot be ignored. The second thing that cannot be ignored is the United States. Uh, it is not. It might not be to your or someone else's liking that United States remains so much engaged in the Middle East, and but I don't think you can. Uh, Not only because Israel's principal backer is the United States, because also that there are other interests that are involved that would predicate that the US remains engaged. You cannot exclude either of them and have a solution. So when Iranians are suggesting some kind of a solution to it, I'm not very optimistic that can be. And pretty much, if I understand a little bit of IR, I understand the Iranian solution to it is absolutely utopian. You cannot have a solution like that. Supporting Hezbollah, Hamas, they have the right to support anybody except those who are causing, disastrous kind of consequences. But that's Iran's choice, Iran's foreign policy. But on the other hand, when Iran has its vested interest in the region, vis-a-vis Saudis, simply involving Israelis and Saudis and the Qataris cannot solve the problem. That is a realization that Washington needs to understand. There are people who are understanding. A larger number of younger population is understanding, and hopefully this would prevail at some point. But right now, this moment, what has been done expectedly, at least it has been deferred. I think, given what we have seen in media, U.S. intervention has prevented. Number one is Israel's invasion into Gaza, ground invasion. That has been deferred, at least deferred. I hope it has been complete. At some point they will have to abandon this whole idea. Because previously, whenever they entered into Gaza, moving few kilometers have taken months for them. Last time when Israelis invaded Gaza, with high casualty. And I'm not talking about the civilian casualty, I'm talking about the Israeli casualty. And the civilian casualty, if you take those, this is absolutely a horrible situation. All these things are very important in this context. That needs to be taken into account.
If I may add to what Professor Ali Riaz has said, one, I think for Americans to take into consideration, another issue is, in my view, is taking shape. After 7th of October, what Israelis have been expecting Saudi Arabia to continue to, support them, Saudi Prince Salman talked to the Iranians. So that was something that was unusual. And his very strong position now with regard to the Palestinian issue, that must be giving the Americans some serious thought, because it means if Iran and Saudi Arabia, if they are on the more or less same page on this issue at least, then it's a headache, because the whole American strategy from President Trump's time, was to bypass the Palestinian issue and then build up a regional coalition where Israel can work with other Arab states who are friends of the United States or the West, for example. That kind of strategy seems to have now lost its steam. And if the Americans are not there, if Americans leave it as it is now, then China has already been there. China has negotiated a kind of rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Already they are there. And Russians will definitely take advantage. Russians are already there in Syria. So I think that new churning that is taking place in the Middle East, centering around this ongoing challenge in Gaza and Israel, I think the Americans now realize that they cannot leave this place unattended, and if they have to be there, then they will have to create a situation which is, I would say, reasonably habitable or reasonably peaceful. Otherwise, it would be very difficult. And I'm seeing also, I've never not seen people talking about the Houthis. And today in the Western newspapers, reports are coming in. Houthis have raised a strong army. They can harm the American interest and so on and so forth. So we have to also take into account Americans don't want to engage in a conflict in the Middle East right at this time, although they have mobilized a lot of their forces, because they understand that then they could be vulnerable. And we have seen in 1982, almost 240 American soldiers got killed in Lebanon. So the Americans have their lessons in Middle East. So I think they are cautious, careful, and now they will have to, because of the situation now, my sense is that they will have to think afresh or think slightly differently than what they were thinking during the last decade or so.
Well, Mr. Humayun Kabir, thank you very much. Now this is a time to look at Bangladesh. What is happening now at the moment? Because you know very well the day after tomorrow, I mean on Sunday, there is a big rally in Dhaka city. Opposition political parties have declared they will have a big rally here. At the same time, the ruling party almost they have taken decision not to allow anything in the city. So it is a Pagnasa situation, conflicting situation in Bangladesh. And Mr. Ali Riaz, what is your focus on this issue?
There are three things that I would bring to your attention. First of all, that this situation has emerged, talking about the rallies that you are talking, having a rally is a fundamental right of Bangladeshi citizens, right? It is enshrined in the constitution. So the oppositions are having a rally should not have been such a big thing. But it has become, because over the years, what we have seen until last summer, basically last year's summer, what we have seen, the opposition was not allowed. Under certain circumstances, they might have been allowed in a smaller gathering, but they couldn't. Because what the police have done, and subsequently what we have seen over the months, that any time the opposition tries to have a gathering, either they're hindered because through the transport strike and these and that, and not to mention the police, and definitely the ruling party activists. They have engaged in unlawful act of invading privacy by taking a telephone from people. So this is the number one thing, that let us look at the situation which created this tension. Everyone is kind of tribulation, if we call it tribulation. Uncertainty is prevailing. What will happen, whether there will be confrontation or not. Why the confrontation issue is coming up? Because what we have seen, the actions of the government. The second point is that the ruling party, you mentioned ruling party continuing to have these kind of gatherings. They have every right to have the gatherings. But if you look at each and every time opposition called for a demonstration, they have put it right there. It is simply a provocation to entice or provoke the opposition into kind of violence, which so far opposition have managed to somehow evade the situation, restrain themselves. I'm hoping they would continue to do so, and I'm hoping that some sense would prevail. But the belligerent rhetoric, incendiary rhetoric of asking the party activists to bring sticks to city with a specified length and so on and so forth, with a reminder of what happened in 2006, is not good. That's not a behavior that a ruling party should demonstrate, but they are. The third point is this, that the central question is not the demonstration. The central question is What would be the way to have an election that is free, fair, inclusive, participatory? And when I say participatory, I don't mean political parties, where the voters can freely exercise their right. Bangladesh had two elections where it didn't happen. Two elections, two consecutive elections. We have to accept that fact. That unfortunately, the election commission seems to be forgotten completely that this is what happened previously. The ruling party would, because they are the beneficiary. So, with all these things, I hope the city would not see the violence, but whether they see the violence or not would not resolve the question, the central question, as to how to have an election which is acceptable, not only acceptable to the international community. When I say acceptable, I mean acceptable to the majority of Bangladeshi population who had the opportunity to exercise their right. If that is acceptable to them, then it's fine, whoever wins. But it seems that the current system, as it is laid down in constitution as well as the administrative structure that has been created, does not even have the possibility of having an inclusive, free, fair, participatory election. That is the most important thing. So let us not get carried over by one demonstration or two. Let us focus more on what is coming, what needs to be looked into. Going back to what we have discussed already with respect to Middle East situation, as I have said, let us not put it in a very smaller, narrow context. Let us not be myopic. Let us look at the problem which needs to be solved, which can be solved. There are ways to solve it. But most importantly, is there a political will to do it? And in this instance, the political will must come from the ruling party. It is their responsibility. It is incumbent on them. Their incendiary rhetoric, belligerent rhetoric, is not helping. They need to understand that one.
Do you sense any dialogue between ruling party and the opposition?
There has to be a dialogue at the end of the day. There are two solutions, either on the street or which means basically loss of lives, loss of, and most importantly, it's not going to be helpful for Bangladesh economy. And most importantly, the common people will suffer. Already the Bangladesh economic situation is not helpful to those who are at the bottom end of the ladder, the disparity aside, the cost of living has gone through the roof and all sorts of problems. You know better than I do, and most of your audience, I'm sure, would understand. But the point is that what is to discuss about? When we are talking about the dialogue, the necessity of dialogue, what is to discuss about? You cannot have a discussion without the gender. Today, as we are participating in your show, didn't we know actually what we are going to discuss? Ambassador Humayun Kabir knew, I knew, you knew, and I'm sure the person who is behind this screen, he also knew what are we going to discuss. Can there be a dialogue without an agenda? What is the agenda? Here the major issue is that current constitutional and administrative situation is not conducive to have an election. So that needs to be acknowledged, and that should be on the agenda to discuss. Is there a possibility? Likelihood is less because of the situation. What I described as both of them seems to be have elevated into an existential crisis kind of thing. BNP, as the largest opposition party on the street, seems to think that another election would actually decimate them. They have reason to fear because they have experienced the last 14 years. Global experience tells us in Cambodia it has happened. So the fear that BNP has at this point of the existential one is not unfounded. Similarly, Awami League, given that they have been in power for such a long time, and their party activists and the administration have persecuted opposition and been engaged in all kinds of things, that raises fear among them that if we lose the power, what will happen? So there are two things that need to be discussed. You're talking about dialogue. I think there should be two clear things that need to be on the agenda and discussed. Number one, how to come up with a procedure that would need election, that would make election effectively an election, not a show. It has, if it requires, this needs to go beyond the constitution. Constitution is not a divine document. It has been written by the Bangladeshis. They can change it. They have changed it several times. In some cases, not exactly for necessity. This is number one. The second thing is the post-election situation. Any kind of transition that needs to be discussed, that there should be a truth and reconciliation mechanism. And to do so, Bangladeshis can, all political parties can agree that they would seek international cooperation on this under the supervision of the United Nations or other partners. There can be a mechanism that would ensure that nobody is persecuted unduly, rule of law is established, and there would be a supervision, there would be a monitoring from our side, so that if whoever is in power kind of end up in such kind of situation, they will have to face the music, so to speak. So these are the two things that needs to be on the agenda and discussion. There's no other way. The other solution on the street is not good. It's not good for the government, not good for the opposition, but most importantly, it's not good for the people of Bangladesh.
Thank you very much. Professor Ali Riaz, being a political scientist, you spoke very well, and explanation should have its weight. Well, Ambassador Humayun Kabir, Professor Ali Riaz said categorically, any solution on the street is not good for the nation, not good for the country, not good for the democracy. It means he hinted to dialogue. And do you think dialogue is possible under the present circumstances, or they are going to the extreme way? Extreme, it is not the conclusion of the situation. That will bring more and more chaos and conflict. And what is your study, please? Mr. Humayun Kabir.
Well, thank you very much. I think Professor Ali Riaz has given a good elaboration and possible kind of way forward, if I may say so. Now, the question that you have asked, I mean, should there be dialogue for finding a sort of peaceful solution, or an alternative, which is conflict? Now, my question is, or I'm trying to understand, can we afford to have a conflict now? Because that would be very expensive for us as a nation. Why? Let me give you 2-3 points of that. If we look at our history during the last 52 years, Bangladesh moved gradually to where we are today because of our multiple layered connections or linkages to the global environment. And to be precise, our acceleration of the economic growth during the last 30 years was essentially a function of the global market opening due to the globalization process. And we have benefited from the access in terms of loans, aid, investment, export, remittance, migration, and so on and so forth. Now, if you look at if there is a conflict, I mean, I hope that doesn't happen. Already we are getting disconnected gradually because of the uncertainty here. Today, BIDA has brought out a statement saying that this year 1 point some billion less investment has come, foreign investment. That's not a good news. We are seeing that the capital goods import is now getting reduced, which have an impact on the employment. Already there are reports that employment is going down. So, and inflation pressure is up. If you look at the overall economic condition, that is contingent on the trust on the institutions. And that trust, both domestic and external, is a primary element for continuing the economic momentum. Now, any uncertainty, so it's already we are seeing that any uncertainty, particularly political uncertainty, will have an economic cost on us. And remember, the government has been capitalizing on the continued growth, economic growth, development model. If for any reason the economic growth is not maintained, then the whole logic of or whole argument or narrative would be affected negatively. So, what I'm seeing, that if we do not understand that linkages, then any uncertainty will negatively impact those linkages. And Honorable Prime Minister is now in Brussels. The European Union has very clearly said it earlier that a good election, a participatory, credible, free and fair election is important element for granting the GSP facilities to Bangladesh, GSP plus facilities to Bangladesh once Bangladesh graduates. The signal was there. The Americans have said when Scholey came, Scholey, he mentioned that a democratic process and election, if it is there, that will be helpful. If not, then our relationship could get limited. So these are signals we have already seen. And my sense is that conflict affected or generated around election or surrounding election or on the eve of election would be very costly for us. People will not look at the arguments, whichever argument the government will give or the other side will give. People will look at the reality, and that reality, if they are not confident, if they don't have trust on our system, then we are in deep trouble, because any loss of connectivity for Bangladesh would be, as I said, very expensive. That will affect the entire range of our economic activity, and eventually that might affect or harm the government very logic or narrative of development story. So I think the government should understand that. That's my sense. And for the opposition, same thing. I mean, what they are saying on the visa policy, some opposition people might be very happy that now government people could be under that. If there is a proof that opposition has launched the violence, then perhaps, unfortunately, they will have to face the music from that end as well. So my sense is that neither party or neither side has an incentive to go into conflict. But does that mean that automatically a peaceful solution will take place? No. But I think a realization is setting in gradually. For example, if you look at the statement during the last few days, government has said, and the police has said, if the BNP gives us that a guarantee that they will not do the violence, then we can give permission for the meeting. That's one. BNP side said, we have not asked people to sit down on Dhaka streets. So it means that both sides are keeping some space, escape route for them. And my feeling is, taking cue from what happened earlier, we have seen two large meetings in the past, and they have been peaceful. My sense is that despite all these rhetorics that we are seeing, eventually good sense will prevail, and the leadership, those who are there, they understand the consequence of not maintaining a peaceful environment, and nobody wants to take the responsibility for breaking or violating that peaceful environment. So those positive and negative incentives might compel them to maintain their respective trajectory, and they might say, because they have to maintain their workers' group. So the big sounding slogans, wars would be coming. That's natural for political kind of activities. But at the end of the day, they understand the real thing. And as Professor Riaz has said, the issue is not tomorrow or day after tomorrow or tomorrow's incident or event. The issue is how we can ensure a good election, because on that good election, good means free, fair, peaceful, credible election, the future of Bangladesh should depend, whoever comes to govern. And if that future is not, I would say, pleasant, then people, Bangladesh as a whole, might be affected negatively. And I believe nobody wants in Bangladesh. We want to maintain, continue the trajectory that we are on, regardless of who comes to power. Whoever gets the mandate from the people in a free, fair, transparent way and with participation of people, that would be welcome. I mean, I think people have matured now. And when I look at the younger generation, I can see that, like our generation, like Professor Ali Riaz's generation, these days young people are not very much interested in politics. They want to build up their career, they want to have a peaceful life on their own, and so on and so forth. So we have to understand the new generation's aspiration. And within the last 15, 20 years, I think, particularly during the last, after 2000, a new generation has come. And they are the now driving force of our society or social growth or economic growth. So they want peaceful environment. They want to do their own things in their own way. So if I mean that they will determine the future, and if people understand their mind, I mean it is important that we should read their mind properly and do things accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you very, thank you very much, Ambassador Humayun Kabir. Dr. Arias, it is said, real is more ideal than ideal itself. In the context of Bangladesh, no ideals, no idealism. We are thinking what the reality is. What is your conclusion?
Well, I don't know what you mean by there is no ideal. In the sense, if we are talking about ideal as a nation, as a country, as a state, Bangladesh does have one, not one. As a matter of fact, it had been laid out in the Declaration of Independence what kind of society we want, what kind of state we want, and what kind of economy we want. As a matter of fact, that if you look at this document, I think it is the most important document that Bangladesh has ever produced. I know some of the constitutionalists do not agree with me, but I think the Declaration of Independence laid out that ideals, that this is what we should endeavor. Would we succeed 100%? No nation succeeds. It is an endeavor that continues. In the case of the United States, what do we see? Every president at one point or another, every year, as a matter of fact, says that our effort for creating a perfect union is ongoing, right? A perfect union has not been established in the United States after 250 years. So those are the things. With respect to the reality on the ground that we see, the reality is that the expectations has been dashed. People's aspirations have been raised and subsequently been dashed by the failure of the system, right? But yet, the system can be built. Institutions can be built. What I see Bangladesh's problem is the absence of institutions. It has been decimated over the years. There were possibilities that we could see the emergence and the strengthening of the institutions post-1990, but it didn't. Subsequently, that has done, frustrated the processes of establishing institutions, whether it is in case of the rule of law, rule by law is not exactly democracy or in some ways a solution or a pathway for forward. It is the rule of law that needs to be established, which means institutions need to be established. And increasingly what we have seen in case of the absence of an institution is this, that it has been done in such a manner that individual become important. The concentration of power in the hands of the Prime Minister through constitutional and extra-constitutional measures. have not been helpful in creating an institution. Bangladesh's constitution has given enormous power to the prime minister, which is not good for democracy, not good for an institutional, building an institution. So these are the reality that we need to face, but it can be faced. Nothing is beyond the reach. If people want, nothing is beyond the reach. I think that is what I believe, and that is being proven time and again in case of Bangladesh and elsewhere. But when we're talking about Bangladesh, let's talk about Bangladesh. That Bangladeshis have done it, despite all kind of adversities, natural, political, and otherwise. They have achieved something. The Bangladesh not only survived, it thrived. It's, a lot of people question whether it would survive. The Bangladeshis, and I credit Bangladeshis, irrespective of their political affiliation, whether they're in the state sector or in the private sector or in the NGOs, everyone together contributed to have the Bangladesh that today in 2023. There are possibilities, and that can be achieved, and it is possible. So I am perennially optimistic about Bangladesh, despite the fact that I see the problems, and I'm not hesitant to talk about the problems. Sometimes, more forthright than some people think I should. But I do that because I think and I believe that there is a future awaits for this nation, and that can be realized. That is possible.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Ali Riaz. Ambassador Humayun Kabir, your last words, please.
Well, thank you. I think I should say echo what Professor Ali Riaz has mentioned. I I have seen that in the field, and I still see the asset of Bangladesh is its people. And Bangladesh, when I was in the US, I used to tell my American friends that look, Bangladesh and US are equally entrepreneurial in their outlook and activities. Had it not been the case, we would not have survived today. And Professor, I fully agree with Professor Alivias. We have not only survived, we have thrived. And I believe the kind of energy that we have as a collective body. I have worked in different countries in South Asia. I can only tell you that I have not seen another group of people more energetic and entrepreneurial than Bangladesh. The only thing that we need to do, just channel that entrepreneurship into a positive frame and build up the institutions, as Professor Alivias has mentioned, so that we can sustain our journey. Because the state is the highest social institution. As a student of political science, I hope you will agree with me. And the endeavor should be to formalize that arrangement. If we informalize that arrangement, then there is a problem. And unfortunately, we had some kind of episodes of informalization. Now we need to give it a shape as a modern, shape of a modern state. And then I believe that the energy that we have, our people have, Bangladesh, we can conquer. We can be like Singapore in this region. Why not? That's in 71. We never thought about Singapore, but we thought about Switzerland. That was the dream that we had, and I think one can pursue that. And if not us in our generation, definitely next generation can do that.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Humayun Kabir and Mr. Ali Riaz. Both of you so very well, and we are about to end this talk. And before that, I would like to summarize. Viewers, we are going to summarize what the two giant personality here spoke. They talked about the Middle East and the war between Hamas and Palestine, Palestine and Israel. And they are of the same mind. The two-state theory is all of the time. And there should be more and more responsiveness from USA because they are the main player here. And that is of the reality. And they spoke elaborately, vehemently, assertively, and in a very delicate way, more and more. At the same time, they talked about Bangladesh, and both of them believe the sustainable democracy needs a sustainable environment. And for this, institutionalization institutions, they almost all the institutions are at stake, and that should be revived, revitalized. And we believe if we want to survive as a nation, we have to go for democracy. And democracy means free, fair election, credible election, participatory election. All this is not the sweet talks. It's reality. Without all these things, we cannot have democracy here. We are fighting for the democracy all the time. We fought, we won for the time being. Again, we face the same consequences because the political parties and the political leaders, they are not honest enough to bear the load of democracy here. That is the main that is the main problems in Bangladesh. And we believe nothing will take place day after tomorrow or after that tomorrow. Everything will be settled through dialogue. And I personally believe dialogue is the only means to reach at the solution. And we believe streets are not the solution. Dialogue is the solution, solution, solution. And thank you very much, all. Thank you.